The inheritance betrayal. How I turned my family's deception into my greatest victory. Part 1. The Golden Child and the Workhorse. I never planned on becoming the family bank. It just happened gradually, like most life-changing situations do. One small commitment leading to another until suddenly you're carrying the weight of 3 additional adults on your shoulders. My name is Olivia Chen, and at 34, I had built what most would consider an enviable life. I owned a successful digital marketing consultancy that specialized in helping small businesses compete against corporate giants. I had a beautiful condo in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. I had friends who loved me, colleagues who respected me, and a career that fulfilled me. By all objective measures, I was thriving. But family has a way of complicating even the most perfectly constructed life. My older brother Jake was 38, unemployed, or between opportunities, as he liked to say, and living in our parents' basement in the suburbs. He had bounced between half-finished college degrees, unpublished novels, unsuccessful tech startups, and various multi-level marketing schemes that inevitably collapsed beneath him. Despite this track record of consistent failure, our parents, Margaret and Richard Chen, treated him like he was just one brilliant idea away from becoming the next Steve Jobs. "Your brother has vision," my mother would say, her voice tinged with a reverence usually reserved for prophets and poets. "He just needs time to find the right outlet for his creativity." This unwavering faith in Jake's unrealized potential might have been touching if it hadn't come at my expense. While Jake received understanding and patience for his perpetual, almost, success stories, I was expected to be perfect, and perfectly self-sufficient, from the moment I graduated high school. I still remember my father's words on my 18th birthday. "Olivia, you're the sensible one. You'll always land on your feet." At the time, I had taken it as a compliment. Now, 15 years later, I understood it was actually a dismissal, a way of saying they didn't need to worry about me because I would figure things out on my own. And I had. I put myself through Northwestern University by working 2 jobs while maintaining a 3.9 GPA. After graduation, I took an entry-level position at a marketing firm and worked my way up to senior strategist within 4 years. At 27, I left to start my own company, building it client by client until I had a team of 15 employees and a roster of loyal customers. Meanwhile, Jake had burned through 3 college funds, including one that our grandparents had originally set aside for me but was redirected after I secured scholarships, crashed 2 cars that our parents replaced without question, and launched at least 7 revolutionary business ideas that each required family funding to get off the ground. None lasted longer than 8 months. 5 years ago, our mother was diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. The prognosis was excellent with proper treatment, but the diagnosis revealed a more concerning condition. Our parents' financial health was terminal. Years of supporting Jake's failures, combined with my father's earlier-than-planned retirement due to health issues of his own, had depleted their savings. They had remortgaged their house, the house I grew up in, that had once been fully paid off, to fund Jake's most recent venture, a cryptocurrency exchange platform that collapsed when the developer, Jake's former roommate, disappeared with the seed money. When I discovered that they were 3 months behind on their mortgage payments and facing foreclosure, I stepped in without hesitation. Family helps family. That's what I had always been taught. I paid off their mortgage arrears, took over their monthly payments, and set up automatic payments for their car loans and credit card bills. I created a budget for them, set up a system for tracking their expenses, and even hired a financial advisor to help them rebuild some semblance of retirement savings. My mother recovered from cancer, thankfully, but my parents never recovered their financial independence. What began as a temporary rescue operation became a permanent arrangement. Every month, $3,200 disappeared from my account to cover their mortgage, car payments, insurance premiums, and various other bills. That's $38,400 per year. Money that could have been invested in growing my business faster, buying a vacation home, or building a more substantial retirement fund of my own. But I didn't resent it. Not really. These were the people who had raised me, who had driven me to piano lessons and helped with science fair projects and cheered at my graduation. If they needed help now, how could I refuse? Besides, I was successful enough to manage it without severe hardship. It meant fewer vacations, a smaller investment portfolio, and postponing some of my own dreams, but family comes first. That's what I told myself. Jake, of course, contributed nothing to our parents' upkeep. He lived rent-free in their basement, ate their food, used their utilities, and occasionally borrowed their credit cards for what he deemed essential purchases. Usually the latest iPhone or gaming system that would supposedly help him with his newest business concept. "Your brother is going through a tough time," my mother would say whenever I delicately suggested that perhaps Jake could contribute something to the household expenses. "He needs our support right now. When his situation improves, I'm sure he'll help out." His situation never improved. But my resentment grew. I never let it show though. During our weekly Sunday dinners at my parents' house, I'd listen to Jake talk about his latest scheme with feigned interest. I'd nod appreciatively as my parents praised his entrepreneurial spirit and creative thinking. I'd smile and change the subject when they inevitably asked if my company could hire him, just until his next big idea takes off. That particular Sunday in April began like any other. I arrived at my parents' suburban home with a bottle of wine and a dessert from their favorite bakery. My father greeted me with a warm hug, my mother kissed my cheek, and Jake gave me a distracted nod from the couch where he was engrossed in some game on his phone. "How's business, sweetie?" my father asked as we moved into the kitchen. "It's good," I replied, setting the wine on the counter. "We just landed the Hamilton account last week. It's our biggest client yet." "That's wonderful," my mother said, though her tone lacked genuine enthusiasm. "Jake has exciting news too. Tell her, honey." Jake sauntered into the kitchen, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. "I'm starting a podcast network," he announced. "It's going to revolutionize the industry. I've already got 3 hosts lined up, and I'm negotiating with 2 more. All I need is some equipment and a production space." I immediately recognized the familiar pattern: Jake's excitement, my parents' endorsement, and the inevitable ask that would follow. I braced myself. "That's great, Jake," I said carefully. "Podcasting is certainly a growing market." "It's more than growing," he corrected me, his tone condescending despite the fact that digital marketing was literally my area of expertise. "It's exploding. And I've got a unique angle that nobody else is doing." "Oh, what's that?" I asked, genuinely curious despite my reservations. "Can't tell you," he replied with a conspiratorial wink. "Trade secrets. But trust me, it's going to be huge." My mother beamed at him as though he'd just announced a cure for cancer. "Your brother has such vision," she said to me, echoing the refrain I'd heard countless times before. Dinner proceeded as usual, with Jake dominating the conversation with grandiose plans for his podcast empire while my parents hung on his every word. My recent professional achievement, an account that would increase my company's annual revenue by nearly 30%, was forgotten entirely. After dinner, as my mother and I cleared the table while the men moved to the living room to watch a basketball game, she turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Olivia, honey, could you help me organize some paperwork in the study after we finish here? I've been trying to get our files in order, and you're so good at that sort of thing." "Of course," I replied, sensing nothing unusual about the request. I had often helped my parents with administrative tasks, setting up online bill payments, filing insurance claims, organizing tax documents. It was just another way I supported them. An hour later, with the dishes washed and put away, I followed my mother into my father's small home office. The room was cluttered with outdated computer equipment, leftovers from one of Jake's failed tech ventures, stacks of magazines my father couldn't bear to throw away, and a filing cabinet that looked like it had survived several wars. "I've been trying to organize everything by category," my mother explained, gesturing to several piles of papers on the desk. "Insurance in one folder, house documents in another, medical records in a third. But I'm getting confused about what goes where." "No problem," I said, rolling up my sleeves. "Let's start with the most important documents and work our way down." We spent the next hour sorting through papers, insurance policies, property tax statements, medical bills, warranties for appliances long since replaced. My mother seemed unusually anxious, hovering over me as I worked and occasionally reaching to redirect my attention from certain files to others. "Let's focus on the insurance papers first," she'd say, or, "Those medical records can wait for another time." Her behavior struck me as odd, but I attributed it to general anxiety about their financial situation. It wasn't until I opened the filing cabinet's bottom drawer that I understood her nervousness. There, in a crisp manila folder labeled Estate Planning, I found documents dated just 3 months earlier. Their will. I wouldn't have given it more than a passing glance, respecting their privacy, except that my own name caught my eye. And we specifically direct that our daughter Olivia Chen shall not receive any portion of our estate, as she has achieved financial success in her own right and does not require further assistance from us. My hands went cold as I continued reading. We hereby bequeath our entire estate, including our primary residence at 1472 Maple Avenue, all its contents, all financial accounts, investments, and personal property, to our son, Jacob Chen. The will continued with various legal provisions, but those 2 paragraphs had already shattered something inside me. 5 years of monthly payments, countless hours spent managing their finances, setting up automatic bill payments, fixing problems Jake had created. All while they were secretly planning to leave everything, including the house I was paying for, to my irresponsible brother. Olivia, my mother's voice cut through the ringing in my ears. You weren't supposed to see that. I looked up at her, still struggling to process what I'd read. How long have you been planning this? I asked, my voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside me. She had the decency to look embarrassed at least. We updated our will after my cancer scare. It made us realize we needed to have everything in order. In order, I repeated numbly. By cutting me out completely and giving everything to Jake. You don't understand, she said, reaching for the folder, which I pulled away from her grasp. Jake needs security. You're already established. You have your business, your condo. You don't need our little house or old furniture. The house I've been paying for, I reminded her, my voice gaining an edge. The mortgage I've covered for 5 years. The utilities, the property taxes, the insurance, all paid by me. We're grateful for your help, she said quickly. We truly are. But Jake, he's struggling. He needs a safety net. And I don't deserve anything? Not even an acknowledgement of my contributions. My mother sighed, as though I was being unreasonable. Olivia, we always assumed you were helping us because you loved us, not because you expected something in return. Her words struck like a physical blow. Of course I help because I love you, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. But love goes both ways, Mom. Love means acknowledging my sacrifices. Love means not taking me for granted. Nobody's taking you for granted, she protested weakly. I held up the will. This says otherwise. At that moment, my father appeared in the doorway, Jake hovering behind him. Their expressions told me they had heard enough to understand what had happened. What's going on? My father asked, though his guilty expression suggested he already knew. I stood up, still holding the estate documents. I was just discovering that despite paying your mortgage for the past 5 years, I've been explicitly excluded from your will. My father had the grace to look ashamed, but Jake's expression was what truly cut me to the core. There was no surprise there, only smug satisfaction, quickly masked with feigned concern. He knew, I realized aloud. You all knew. You've been planning this together. Now, Olivia, my father began, using the placating tone he always adopted when I was upset. It's not what you think. We just want to make sure Jake is taken care of. While assuming I'll continue to take care of all of you, I finished for him. Jake stepped forward, his expression arranged into what he probably thought was sympathetic concern but came across as condescending. Sis, come on. You know I've had a rough few years. But things are turning around with this podcast network. Once it takes off, I'll pay you back for everything, with interest. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. His designer jeans and pristine sneakers, the Apple Watch on his wrist, the confident smirk that never quite left his face. He had never known hardship, never faced consequences, never had to stand on his own 2 feet. And my parents had enabled it every step of the way. And I had enabled them. I see, I said finally, my voice calmer than I felt. I carefully placed the will back in its folder and returned it to the filing cabinet. Thank you for clarifying where I stand in this family. Olivia, don't be dramatic, my mother said, her tone shifting from conciliatory to irritated. This isn't personal. It's just practical. I gathered my purse and jacket. You're right. It is practical. And I need to be practical too. What does that mean? My father asked, concern finally creeping into his voice. It means I should go, I replied simply. It's getting late, and I have an early meeting tomorrow. Olivia, wait, my mother called as I headed for the front door. We need to discuss this further. No, Mom, I don't think we do, I said, turning to face my family one last time. You've made your position clear. Now I need to reconsider mine. With that, I walked out the door, closing it quietly behind me. No drama, no tears, no raised voices. Just a cold, clear understanding that the dynamic between us had fundamentally changed. As I drove home through the darkening spring evening, a strange calm settled over me. For years, I had defined myself partly through my role as the family fixer, the responsible daughter who could be counted on to solve any problem. That identity had been stripped away in an instant, leaving, what? A woman who had spent 5 years investing in assets that would never yield returns. A woman who had compromised her own dreams to support people who didn't value her contributions. But also, I realized as the Chicago skyline came into view, a woman who was free to redefine those relationships on her own terms. A woman with options. By the time I parked in my condo's garage, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Part 2. The withdrawal. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't call friends to vent or post cryptic messages on social media. Instead, I opened my laptop and got to work. First, I logged into my online banking portal and canceled all automatic payments to my parents' accounts, effective immediately. The mortgage payment that was scheduled to go out in 3 days stopped. The auto transfer for their car payment canceled. The utility bill payment terminated. Next, I drafted emails to their mortgage lender, auto loan provider, and credit card companies. Each message was professionally worded, explaining that I would no longer be making payments on behalf of Margaret and Richard Chen. I provided their contact information so the companies could communicate directly with them moving forward. Then I created a spreadsheet documenting every payment I had made on their behalf over the past 5 years. Mortgage payments, car loans, insurance premiums, property taxes, utility bills, medical expenses not covered by insurance, home repairs, and even the loans to Jake that we all knew would never be repaid. The total made me wince. $192,347.86. Nearly $200,000 that could have been invested in my business, my retirement, or my own quality of life. But the past was the past. What mattered now was the future, and ensuring I didn't throw good money after bad. Finally, I opened a new investment account and set up an automatic monthly transfer of $3,200, the exact amount I had been sending to my parents, into a diversified portfolio focused on long-term growth. I titled the account, My Future Fund, as a reminder of what I was prioritizing from this point forward. With those tasks complete, I closed my laptop, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and slept more soundly than I had in years. The next morning, I immersed myself in work. The Hamilton account needed a comprehensive marketing strategy, and I threw myself into the project with renewed focus. For the first time in years, I didn't check my parents' accounts to ensure bills were paid or answer panicked calls from my mother about some financial form she didn't understand. I simply did my job, the one I was actually paid to do. 7 days passed with no contact from my family. I knew they were probably giving me space to cool down, as my father would put it. They expected me to get over my hurt feelings and return to my role as the family financial support system. After all, I always had before. On day 8, the texts began. Mom, honey, there seems to be an issue with the mortgage payment. The bank called saying it's overdue. Can you check on it when you have a moment? I read the message but didn't respond. 2 hours later, another text arrived. Mom, Olivia? Did you see my message about the mortgage payment? The bank says they haven't received it. We might incur a late fee. Still, I didn't respond. The next day, my father tried his luck. Dad, Princess, is everything okay? Your mother says you haven't responded to her texts about the mortgage. The car payment is overdue too. Are you having money troubles? You know you can always talk to us. The irony of him asking if I was having money troubles almost made me laugh. Almost. By day 10, my mother's texts had turned from concern to panicked. Mom, Olivia, we've received notices from the bank about the mortgage payment and from the car loan company. They're threatening late fees. Please call me as soon as you get this. Mom, I'm getting worried about you. Are you okay? Please just let us know you're all right. Mom, if this is about what you found in the study, we should talk about it. Please don't shut us out. I maintained my silence. It wasn't about punishing them. Not entirely, anyway. It was about creating the space for me to think clearly about my relationship with my family without being pulled back into old patterns by guilt or obligation. On day 12, Jake entered the fray. Jake. What the hell, sis? Mom and Dad are freaking out about bills. I thought you were handling that stuff. They say you're not answering their texts or calls. Whatever your issue is, don't take it out on them. I added his number to my blocked list without replying. 2 days later, exactly 2 weeks after the Sunday dinner that had changed everything, the doorman of my building called up to my condo. Miss Chen, your parents are here to see you. Should I send them up? I took a deep breath. I had known this confrontation was coming. In truth, I was surprised it had taken this long. Yes, James. Please send them up. 5 minutes later, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, my parents stood there looking more disheveled than I had ever seen them. My mother's hair, usually perfectly styled, was pulled back in a hasty ponytail. My father's shirt was wrinkled, and he had missed a spot while shaving. They both wore expressions that mixed worry with indignation. Olivia, my mother began before I could even invite them in. What is going on? We've been trying to reach you for days. The mortgage company is threatening foreclosure, and the car loan is 2 weeks overdue. And you couldn't be bothered to pick up the phone? My father added, his tone somewhere between hurt and angry. We thought something might have happened to you. I stepped back from the doorway. Please come in, I said calmly. Would you like some coffee? My composure seemed to throw them off balance. They exchanged confused glances as they stepped inside, taking in my spotless kitchen and the soft jazz playing in the background. I was clearly not in crisis. Coffee would be nice, my father said uncertainly, as they settled at my kitchen island. I busied myself with the coffee maker, my back to them as I measured grounds and filled the water reservoir. I'm sorry you've been worried, I said without turning around. I've been very busy with the new Hamilton account. It's required my full attention. Too busy to answer a text? My mother asked incredulously. Too busy to make sure our bills are paid? Olivia, that's not like you at all. I turned to face them, leaning against the counter as the coffee began to brew. You're right, I acknowledged. It's not like the old me. But I've been reconsidering my priorities lately. What does that mean? My father asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. The coffee maker beeped, and I turned to pour 3 mugs, adding cream to my father's and sugar to my mother's, just as they preferred. I slid the mugs across the counter before taking a seat across from them. It means, I said carefully, that I've decided to invest in my own future rather than continuing to fund an inheritance that explicitly excludes me. My mother's face flushed red. This is about the will? That's what this is about? You're punishing us because you feel entitled to our things. I took a sip of my coffee, considering her words. It's not about entitlement, Mom. It's about respect and recognition. I'm not punishing you. I'm simply reallocating my resources to investments that appreciate my contributions. My father tried a different approach. But honey, we always assumed you were helping us because you loved us, not because you expected something in return. I did help because I love you, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. But love doesn't mean being taken for granted. Love doesn't mean watching you shower Jake with affection and financial safety nets while I'm expected to foot the bill and ask for nothing in return. They sat in stunned silence, their coffee cooling untouched before them. Here's what's going to happen, I continued when it became clear they had no immediate response. I've calculated exactly how much I've contributed to your finances over the past 5 years. It comes to just over $192,000. My father blanched at the figure, but my mother's expression hardened. We never asked you for that money, she said defensively. You offered to help. Yes, I did, I agreed. Because I thought we were a family that supported each other. I didn't realize support only flowed in one direction. That's not fair, my father protested weakly. Isn't it? I countered. When was the last time either of you asked about my business challenges? When did you ever offer to help me with anything? When have you ever treated my accomplishments with the same enthusiasm you show for Jake's endless, almost, successes? They exchanged guilty glances that told me they knew I was right. I've transferred the equivalent of my past contributions into an investment account for my future, I continued. Moving forward, you have 3 options. I held up one finger. Option 1. You figure out your finances on your own. Jake can step up if he's going to inherit everything anyway. A second finger joined the first. Option 2. I continue helping, but we draft a formal loan agreement with interest, secured against the house. A third finger. Option 3. You amend your will to reflect a fair distribution that acknowledges my contributions, and we can discuss a new arrangement for the bills. My mother's mouth fell open. You can't be serious. We're your parents. Yes, you are. And I love you both, I said sincerely. But this isn't about love. It's about respect. I refuse to be financially responsible for assets that will never benefit me or acknowledge my sacrifices. My father, ever the peacemaker, tried again. But what about Jake? He's your brother. He needs. Jake is 38 years old, Dad, I interrupted gently. What he needs is to grow up. And what you both need to understand is that I won't set myself on fire to keep everyone else warm anymore. This is how you treat family? My mother asked, her voice rising. Abandoning us when we need you most? Family is supposed to be reciprocal, I replied evenly. And for too long, our relationship hasn't been. I'm simply establishing boundaries that should have been in place years ago. Boundaries, my father repeated, as though the word was foreign to him. Olivia, we're not some toxic friends or bad bosses. We're your parents. Yes, and parents should want their children to thrive, both of them, not just one. Parents shouldn't exploit one child's success to enable another child's perpetual dependence. My mother stood abruptly, her coffee still untouched. I can't believe what I'm hearing. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me in the past decade, Mom? I asked quietly. Besides expect me to solve your financial problems while excluding me from the family legacy? She had no answer for that. Instead, she gathered her purse and headed for the door. Richard, we're leaving. Clearly, Olivia has made her decision. My father looked torn, glancing between my mother's retreating form and me. Princess, he began uncertainly, can't we discuss this further? There must be some compromise. I've offered 3 perfectly reasonable options, I reminded him. The ball is in your court now. With a heavy sigh, he rose and followed my mother to the door. Before leaving, he turned back to me. This isn't over, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. We'll figure something out. After they left, I sat alone in my kitchen, finishing my coffee and feeling strangely light. For the first time in years, I had prioritized my own well-being over my family's expectations. It wasn't selfish, it was necessary. A recalibration long overdue. I knew they would be back. This conversation was just the opening salvo in what would likely be a prolonged negotiation. But I had made my position clear, and I had no intention of backing down. 3 days later, as predicted, my parents returned. This time, they brought reinforcements in the form of my brother Jake. I buzzed them up to my condo, mentally preparing for round 2. Jake swaggered in first, radiating unearned confidence as always. He dropped onto my sofa without being invited, stretching his arms across the back as though settling in for a casual visit. So sis, he began, his tone somewhere between condescending and conspiratorial, Mom and Dad told me about your little situation. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. Look, I get it, he went on, mistaking my silence for receptiveness. You're jealous. You've always been jealous of my relationship with Mom and Dad. And now you're throwing a temper tantrum because they're planning to leave the house to me. It's childish, honestly. Our parents hovered behind the sofa, nodding encouragingly at Jake's assessment of the situation. Mom and Dad need your help, Jake continued, his voice taking on a self-righteous tone that made my skin crawl. They're facing foreclosure and repossession because of your selfish behavior. Is that really how you want to treat the people who raised you? And how are you helping them, Jake? I asked quietly. As the future inheritor of all their assets, what contribution are you making to their financial stability? He shifted uncomfortably. I'm between opportunities right now, as you know. But my podcast network is about to take off, and then I'll. Yes, I'm familiar with the pattern, I interrupted. Another brilliant idea that just needs a little more time and a lot more of someone else's money. Jake's face darkened. This is different. I have investors interested. Names? I asked simply. He looked away. I can't disclose that information. Confidentiality agreements and all that. Of course, I replied, not bothering to hide my skepticism. I turned my attention to my parents. Have you considered the options I presented? My mother's lips thinned to a tight line. We don't appreciate being given options by our own daughter. This isn't a business negotiation. Actually, it is, I corrected her gently. For 5 years, our relationship has been primarily financial. I'm simply clarifying the terms moving forward. See, Jake interjected. This is what I'm talking about. Cold. Calculating. You've always been like this, Olivia. Always keeping score. I felt a surge of anger at his hypocrisy but pushed it down. I haven't been keeping score, Jake. If I had, I would have stopped supporting Mom and Dad years ago. But recent events have forced me to reevaluate. What recent events? He scoffed. Finding out you're not getting the house? Boo-hoo. You have this fancy condo and your successful business. Why do you need their modest ranch house anyway? It's not about the house itself, I explained, though I suspected he knew that perfectly well. It's about the principle. It's about acknowledging my contributions to this family. Your contributions, Jake repeated with a dismissive wave. You mean the money? Because that's all you know how to give, isn't it? Not time, not emotional support, just money. The accusation stung because there was a kernel of truth in it. I had often substituted financial support for physical presence or emotional availability. But that was a two-way street. When was the last time any of you asked about my life? I countered. When have you shown interest in my work or my challenges or my accomplishments? When have you offered me support of any kind, emotional or otherwise? Uncomfortable silence followed my questions. The fact is, I continued more softly, our family dynamic has been broken for a long time. I've enabled a situation that wasn't healthy for any of us. Not for me, not for you too, I nodded to my parents. And certainly not for Jake, who's been denied the opportunity to become self-sufficient. Don't talk about me like I'm not here, Jake snapped. And don't pretend this intervention is for my benefit. You're just bitter because for once, Mom and Dad chose me over you. I looked at my brother. Really looked at him. Behind the bravado and the defensive anger, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Fear. Jake was terrified. He had built his entire adult identity around being the favored child, the one with potential, the one who just needed one more chance. Without that identity, and without the financial safety net our parents and I had provided, who was he? This isn't about choosing sides, Jake, I said, my tone gentler than before. It's about creating a healthier dynamic for all of us. Including you. I don't need your help, he retorted, but his voice lacked conviction. I turned back to my parents. Actually, Jake's right about one thing. I have been substituting money for more meaningful support. And that stops now too. My father looked confused. What do you mean? I mean I want a real relationship with you both. Not just a financial arrangement. I want to know how you're really doing, not just whether your bills are paid. I want you to know me as a person, not just as a checkbook. My mother's expression softened slightly. We do know you, Olivia. Do you? I challenged. What's the name of my best friend? What project am I most excited about at work right now? What am I afraid of? What am I hoping for? Her silence was answer enough. I've been researching some options for your financial situation, I continued, switching tactics. There are several paths forward that don't involve either foreclosure or me continuing to fund an inheritance that excludes me. What options? My father asked cautiously. You could downsize to a smaller home that you can afford on your retirement income. You could look into a reverse mortgage, though that would leave less for Jake to inherit. You could rent out part of your house for additional income. I paused before adding, or Jake could start paying rent for the basement he occupies, which would help offset your monthly expenses. Jake shot to his feet. This is bullshit. You're just trying to control everyone and everything, as usual. Mom, Dad, let's go. We don't need to sit here and listen to this. But my parents didn't move. They exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher. Jake, sit down, my father said firmly, surprising all of us. Olivia's right. This situation isn't sustainable for anyone. Jake gaped at him. Dad, you can't be serious. She's manipulating you. No, son, she's being honest with us. Something we all should have been with each other a long time ago. My father turned to me. We've talked it over, your mother and I. We were hasty. With a will. My mother nodded reluctantly. We never meant to hurt you, Olivia. We just thought. Well, we thought you were the strong one. The one who didn't need our help or our legacy. Everyone needs to feel valued, I said quietly. Everyone needs to know their contributions matter. We're willing to amend the will, my father continued. A 50-50 split between you and Jake seems fair. And we'll document your past contributions as an interest-free loan against the estate. Jake's face contorted with disbelief and rage. You can't be serious, he shouted, looking back and forth between our parents. You're going to reward her manipulation? This is exactly what she wanted. Jake, please, my mother began, her voice taking on the placating tone she always used when he was upset. It's only fair. Olivia has contributed significantly too. Fair. Jake interrupted, his voice rising. What's fair about changing the plan now? You promised me the house. You promised me security. I watched the familiar dynamic unfold, Jake's outburst, my parents' attempts to soothe him, the gradual capitulation to his demands that would inevitably follow. But something was different this time. My father's expression had hardened in a way I'd rarely seen. Enough, he said quietly, but with unmistakable authority. Jake, this isn't up for debate. Your mother and I have made our decision. Jake stared at our father in shock, unaccustomed to being denied. This is bullshit, he muttered, grabbing his jacket. I'm out of here. He stormed toward the door, pausing only to shoot me a venomous glare. Happy now? You've turned them against me. The door slammed behind him, leaving an awkward silence in my condo. My parents looked exhausted, defeated even. I felt a pang of sympathy despite everything. He'll calm down, my father said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. He always does. My mother wiped at her eyes. We never meant to create this situation, Olivia. We didn't realize how unbalanced things had become. I nodded, allowing myself to believe she meant it. I know. And I'm sorry too, for cutting off communication instead of addressing this directly. That wasn't fair to either of you. My father reached across the table and took my hand in his. We've all made mistakes here. The important thing is that we're fixing them now. So what happens next? I asked. We'll contact our attorney tomorrow to amend the will, my father replied. 50-50th split, as I said, and formal acknowledgement of your financial contributions. And we'd like to try to have a real relationship, my mother added hesitantly. One that isn't just about money and obligations. I'd like that too, I said, surprised by how much I meant it. And Jake? I asked, knowing he couldn't be ignored in any solution. My parents exchanged glances. Jake needs to grow up, my father said finally. We haven't done him any favors by sheltering him from consequences. That changes now. He won't like it, my mother warned. No, my father agreed. But it's necessary. For all of us. Part 3. The transformation. The next few months weren't easy. Jake refused to speak to any of us, communicating with our parents only through angry text messages demanding they come to their senses. My parents struggled with setting new boundaries, occasionally backsliding into old enabling behaviors when Jake's messages became particularly manipulative. True to their word, they amended their will, creating a 50-50 split between Jake and me. They also signed a formal acknowledgement of my past financial contributions, to be repaid from the estate before any division of assets. The document was largely symbolic. I didn't expect to receive that money back in my lifetime, but the acknowledgement meant more than I had anticipated. More importantly, my parents and I began rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms. I continued helping them financially, but on a more limited basis and with clear boundaries. They made serious efforts to downsize their expenses, selling one of their cars and cutting unnecessary subscriptions and services. They also began showing genuine interest in my life and business, attending my company's 5th anniversary celebration and asking thoughtful questions about my work. Jake remained the wild card. After 2 months of silence, he moved out of our parents' basement without notice, leaving behind only a note saying he'd found investors for his podcast network and was relocating to Austin, Texas to build his empire. My parents were devastated by his departure but relieved to have the tension resolved, at least temporarily. 6 months after our confrontation, I received an unexpected text from Jake. "We need to talk. Coffee tomorrow?" My treat. Curious and cautious, I agreed to meet him at a neutral coffee shop downtown. I arrived early, securing a table in the corner that offered some privacy. Jake arrived precisely on time, a small miracle given his habitual lateness, looking different than I remembered. His designer clothes had been replaced with a simple button-down shirt and jeans. The perpetual smirk was gone, replaced by an expression I couldn't quite read. "Thanks for coming," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. "But I'm glad you reached out." He nodded, a flash of vulnerability crossing his face before he composed himself. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months. About you, about Mom and Dad, about everything. And I owe you an apology," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "I've been a selfish, entitled jerk. To everyone, but especially to you." I studied him, searching for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but found none. "What changed?" I asked. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Reality hit me in the face. Hard. He took a sip of his coffee before continuing. "There were never any podcast investors. That was just another lie I told to save face when I left. I ended up crashing on a friend's couch in Austin, running out of money fast." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said and meant it. "What did you do?" "The only thing I could do. I got a job." He said it as though announcing he'd climbed Mount Everest. "Nothing glamorous. Customer service at a tech company. Entry level. Bottom of the ladder." "That must have been an adjustment," I said carefully. "That's putting it mildly." Jake stared into his coffee. "First real job I've held for more than a month since college. First time I've paid my own rent, bought my own groceries, lived within a budget." He looked up at me. "First time I've actually finished something I started." "And how does it feel?" I asked. A slow smile spread across his face. Not the cocky smirk I was accustomed to, but something more genuine. "Terrifying. Exhausting. And good. Really good, actually." "I'm proud of you," I said, surprised to find I truly was. He shook his head. "Don't be. Not yet. I've got a long way to go to make up for, well, everything. But I'm trying. That's all any of us can do." Jake leaned forward, his expression serious. "I've been talking to Mom and Dad. About the will, about the money you've given them. About how I've taken advantage of everyone. And I want to make it right. I can't repay what you've given. Not right away. But I've started sending Mom and Dad money each month. It's not much, but it's what I can afford right now." I felt a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying begin to lift. "That's a good start, Jake." "There's more," he continued. "I told them I don't want the house. Not half, not any of it. I want them to sell it when they're ready to downsize, use the money for their retirement, and whatever's left can be split between us after you're repaid for everything you've contributed." I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you serious?" "Completely. It's the right thing to do." He met my gaze steadily. "I know one conversation and a few good intentions don't make up for years of selfishness. I'm not asking for forgiveness or trust right away. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to change. Really change." "Change takes time," I acknowledged. "But recognizing the need for it is the hardest part. You've done that." We spent the next hour talking more openly than we had in years. Perhaps than we ever had. Jake shared his struggles with feeling perpetually inadequate, always chasing the next big idea rather than building something sustainable. I talked about my resentment and the pressure I'd felt to be perfect. As we parted ways, Jake hesitated before asking, "Do you think we could do this again sometime?" Start rebuilding. Whatever it is siblings are supposed to have. I'd like that, I replied, finding I meant it. Over the next year, our family dynamics continued to evolve. My parents sold their house, moving into a comfortable condo they could afford on their retirement income with occasional help from both Jake and me. Jake remained in Austin, steadily advancing in his company and continuing to send our parents monthly contributions. As for me, the Hamilton account turned out to be just the beginning. Freed from the financial and emotional burden I'd carried for so long, I poured my energy into growing my business. We expanded into new markets, doubled our client roster, and increased revenue by 60%. The My Future Fund investment account grew steadily, giving me options I hadn't dared consider before. 2 years after that fateful Sunday dinner, I received another unexpected text from Jake. I've been offered a promotion. Digital marketing director for the company. Thought you might appreciate the irony. Could use some expert advice if you're willing. I smiled as I typed my response. Congratulations. Happy to help. Call me tomorrow and we'll talk strategy. That evening, as I stood at my condo windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed since discovering that will. What had seemed like betrayal had ultimately led to liberation. Not just financially, but emotionally. By refusing to continue enabling unhealthy patterns, I had forced a reckoning that ultimately benefited everyone. I hadn't just gained half a house in some distant future inheritance. I'd gained something far more valuable. A healthier relationship with my parents, a brother who was finally becoming the person he was capable of being, and the freedom to prioritize my own dreams without guilt. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't getting what you thought you wanted, but discovering what you truly need, and having the courage to fight for it.